And another thing about those sickly looking bastards out there, you might look sick, but they are sick. Let me rephrase. They might look sick, but you are sick. I fucked that up a little bit. It was from her channel.
No, that video is definitely on your channel.
What if the Roman Empire never existed?
I'm so ready.
You look so good.
No.
Baby.
No, go away.
My love.
No, go away.
Sweetie.
Yes.
Can I kiss your face to blood splatter sounds?
No.
Yeah.
Be gone, thought.
Be gone, thought. So I watched this video that said it is another anime trying to laugh challenge, but instead the title of the video, even when I clicked on it, was Anime Thought Slayer Compilation. That was the name of the compilation.
What was it?
It was like a video of like dudes, like anime dudes, trying to like focus on something, and then a girl comes up and like tries to flirt with them, and then they're mean to them.
That's it?
That's the whole compilation, and I watched the entire 10 minutes. One was funny because the one girl was like talking to him, he was like, you know, off in like anime thought, and he like scooped her up. She's like, oh, is this the time we become together? And he like dropped her in the water, and I thought, I would do that to Skitten. But, you know.
Yo.
I explained to the people that you can only do that if they're anime women, because anime women don't feel pain. So it's okay.
Tell that to the bitches from Claymore. Getting their legs chopped off.
Yo,
and shit.
okay.
Like, shink,
they only
shink,
don't feel pain unless
shink,
they do.
Shink.
Cause those women were fucked up, yo. They badass though. Play.
You gotta finish that shit.
I know. This
video was sponsored by NordVPN, a virtual private network service that provides much needed
vaginas penetrating. All right.
security in an age where
cybersecurity
is more
nubs.
important.
Vagina penis nubs. Of course. Nord vagina's penis nubs. Giving nubs to your vagina penises since 1984.
I thought it was giving penis nubs to vaginas.
Oh, penis nubs to vaginas. You got a penis? Make it into a nub. Stick it in a vagina. What did he say? What did he say? JJ was like, oh man, OTW. And I was like, yeah, right. You know, I said some like optometrists tangling webs, and DJ was like, no, it's otter titty whales. Of course, yeah, otter titty whales.
God.
We got it. We'll see you, otter titty whales, man. I'm also otter titty whales.
Rome changed everything.
Everything?
Not just because of the political system that they popularized in the West, which still influences us today. Not because their language was the forefather to all of these languages. Rome's simple existence, their conquering of Europe, transformed a continent just as much as Europeans conquered the Americas. And this influence began far before Rome called themselves an empire. The Roman Republic made up the entire Italian peninsula. It conquered and assimilated so many cultures just in their neighborhood that we only know about them because the Romans knew them. We all like to imagine a Europe where the Roman Empire simply never fell. But after doing some research, seeing how much Rome turned Europe into Europe, I want to imagine a world where Rome never existed at all.
Crazy.
Yeah, so
this shit is about to like be cool, but stress me the fuck out.
Okay, so there is a historical theory, you know, also political theory, also war theory about power vacuums, and so most of stuff generally revolves around the fact that like if Rome never existed, somebody else would have done it because Rome wouldn't have been there, and it wouldn't have stopped another, you know, unifying force to prevail, because history shows you over and over again, if you unify and assimilate, you know, and imperialize, you then grow and learn from other cultures. But Rome is one of those like ancient time periods where like that doesn't have to be the case. Like Rome is the case study to prove every other superpower. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like if you take Rome away, you're now saying like, you know, because like Mongol territory before then is like rape and pillage. Like that is not assimilation. Like we are killing and dominating.
Right.
We're not assimilating and learning.
And then like when they did assimilate and learn, they just got taken over by more Mongols. Those Mongols were like, oh, you a weak ass bitch now?
Yeah, because that's what I'm saying though. Like Mongols just kept taking even themselves. You're completely right. So You know, but we'll see where this one goes with it. Yeah, you're completely right, dude.
This is going to be a journey that alters history more than any other scenario I think I ever did. The Romans existing and spreading into Northern Europe was what changed the European people from simply the inhabitants of a large peninsula next to Asia to a fully fledged, important continent on the world scale. But what it took to get there transformed all of them in the process under Roman sword and steel. Where to even begin in this alternate timeline? Let's set the stage of what Europe was like before there ever was a Roman Republic in the first place. Who were the people, the civilizations and cultures in a pre-Rome world? We'll begin in 400 BC. Most of what we know about Europe north of Italy is either detailed by Greek or Roman historians, archaeology, and plain old speculation. These places were shadowy, mythical lands occupied by a savage people far different than the Mediterranean.
Everybody
north of Italy were the regions of Gaul, Germania, Britannia, and Hibernia. The last two simply thought as myths by the Romans until the times of Julius Caesar. The people in these lands were the Celts. Today, when we think of Celtic, we think of Irish, Scottish, or Cornish, a group that has made their name in the islands far north of Europe. However, these places aren't actually the home of the Celtic people. Ireland and Scotland are more like the last bastion of a people that once controlled most of Europe.
Okay.
But we'll talk more about that later. South of Rome, the Mediterranean was split between three civilizations, with colonies scattered and dividing the region. The Greeks for centuries had sailed across the sea, colonizing the island of Sicily, Crete, and even southern Italy. In North Africa, the Carthaginians, descendants of Phoenicians from modern-day Lebanon, had created a trading empire that controlled the Western Sea using people from...
Like, I understand, like, the Romans, like, came over and, like, put their culture and their, like, infrastructure in that part of Africa.
Yeah.
But, like, people in Africa, like, had their own shit going.
Right.
You know what I mean? They had their own system of the monarchy, like, all of that. So it's not like the Romans came and, like, did them any favors.
No, but it's like, it's one of those things where, like, it basically opened up trade to another part of the world and shared information that they would have never had. And, like, the way they did that is through Roman infrastructure.
Right.
Like, and that's what creates, like, a power base to create stability. Stability creates growth.
Both Europe and Africa as mercenaries in their wars. To the north of Rome was a culture group known as the Etruscans, or Razna as they called themselves. The Etruscans didn't have a single state. They were like the Greeks, a civilization of people separated into numerous city-states. We actually know a lot more about the Etruscans because of their proximity to Rome, but we'll talk about them later on.
Okay.
So now that the stage has been set, let's imagine an alternate world where Rome never existed. History, especially ancient history, is a fickle thing. Rome wasn't destined by some divine power to create the largest empire in European history. It was a long, arduous journey of decisions made over generations.
Right.
What I'm really trying to say is there are so many ways Rome could have simply never rose. The brutality of human warfare has really been forgotten in the modern world. Even during the most catastrophic events of the world wars, the cities destroyed were still rebuilt. Hiroshima, Stalingrad, and Dresden were obliterated, and yet today all are populated cities. This is really the outlier in human history.
Right.
For most of human civilization, there have been many occasions a city is not just simply destroyed, it's annihilated.
Yeah, like vanishes.
Its foundations are uprooted. The entire populace is enslaved, raped, and murdered until the only thing left is rubble, and nobody can
sent around the world,
Yep.
torn from their families.
Well, 'cause especially with the Roman system of slavery, they made sure that, like, if they captured a bunch of people from fucking one region, they sent those slaves everywhere so that they couldn't organize.
Right.
So, you know, oh, you guys all speak the same language? Hell the fuck nah. Like,
but like skilled labor was another one of the important things that Roman culture, like, it was important to Roman culture, where, like, you don't kill skilled labor. You know what I mean? Like, if you do, like, a service, but at the same time, like, you're not about to fucking revolt. That's bullshit.
The city of Antioch was once a center of Christendom before the Muslims killed every Christian in the city in 1260. Carthage was once an empire, but the Romans, after 3 wars, wiped it off the map. Troy was thought to be just a simple Greek legend, until 20th century discoveries revealed it was indeed a real city in western Anatolia. Rome easily could have met this fate at some time in its history. In 387 BC, the Gauls sacked the city. It was this attack which spurred Rome to invest in a culture of defense and military prowess. It would never be attacked again. It could be so easy that Rome was simply wiped off the map if the attack was strong enough or savage enough in this alternate scenario.
Okay, so that's what we're taking.
Of course, it simply could have just been an insignificant city on the Italian peninsula, but I wanted to go on that nice little tangent. It is an alternate 400 BC. On the coast of northern Africa, the city of Carthage has already began its expanse across the Mediterranean. The Greeks and Etruscans sustained their own civilizations of city-states. Moving forward 70 years, Alexander the Great still begins his conquest of basically the entire known world at the time. The expanse of both civilizations still happened as normal, since Rome had nothing to do with any of these. The first major change begins around the 200s, when the Roman Republic was supposed to rise and replace the Etruscans. So this new alternate Italy remains the culturally divided mess that it was before the unifying force of Rome. The main dominant power in the region is the previously mentioned Etruscans. So who were these people?
This is like the best game of civilization I've ever played in my life. This is great.
The Etruscans and Romans shared very similar history. Hell, even the last Roman kings were Etruscan. And the people would be the most to contribute to this new Roman Republic, even if the Romans looked down on their culture. To the Romans, the Etruscans were what we would call today... They looked down on their northern neighbors as hedonistic, sex-craved, and immoral. A weak neighbor which Rome believed could easily be conquered, and, well, they were. However, even with their lax views of sexuality, the Etruscans still were fine builders and artisans. It's even said many of the contributions we see as Roman were really just adapted from what the Etruscans already had. Many of the builders of the aqueducts and arches were Etruscan. You could say Rome had a great way of copying others after they had already conquered them. Like Disney.
That's what I'm saying.
But less evil.
Oh my God.
And Italy with Etruscan influence is split into multiple different states, perhaps never truly banding together, with the Etruscans culturally dominating the north and the southern tip of the peninsula being controlled by the Greek colonists. These colonies were not short-lived either. They existed up until the Roman legions came and effectively kicked the Greeks out. Without Rome, it's very likely the Greeks simply
kicked them out and or were just like, hey, pay us taxes, we'll let you stay. And the Greeks were like, sure.
Yeah, sounds good.
Would have stayed and Hellenized the region, making it no different than the other islands they owned, or western Anatolia. Well, I can't say very likely, because there's always a chance that another power would come and control this area. More specifically, Carthage. The Punic Wars really were the deciding turning point for Western civilization. A battle between who really would influence Europe, even if neither side truly knew the full implications of this. Without Rome to truly beat back the influence of the North African city, Carthage is left completely alone to colonize most of the western Mediterranean and effectively change the region by themselves. Now, this affects so many things, but I'll try to explain them quickly. First, of course, is the starting point for culture in Western Europe. This alternate Europe is now like North America without the colonists. It's left to its own devices and destiny. Carthage takes the mantle as the empire that influences the people of Gaul and Iberia, just not in the way that Rome did. When I mean so much changes since Rome isn't around, I just don't mean in terms of territory. So in this world where Carthage now has free reign to control this portion of Europe, what would they do? They wouldn't conquer and push back the people like the Romans did. If anything, their influence is more subtle. Carthage was a trading empire. They spread colonies far and wide to get more riches from other lands. It was different than the Romans who invaded to defend Rome. Carthage defended its riches. Carthage wouldn't conquer Gaul like the Romans did, but influenced them with trade and connections. Carthage as well was a naval power. They didn't dominate like the infantry of Rome. Hannibal was the exception, not the norm. Carthage didn't have the tactics of Rome either until Hannibal. But even if they directly mirrored Rome, which is unlikely, the position of their capital would put them in a disadvantage. Imagine trying to control the province of Gaul while being across the sea.
Right.
Conquering Gaul was a gargantuan task for even the Romans to do, and they were neighbors on land. So be it from their love for money instead of blood, or their incompetence, or simply geography, a Europe dominated by Carthage is ironically a less changed one.
Right.
There is no great empire to change the continent in its image, and so the native tribes are left to define themselves. Development is slower over the course of millennia. However, with Carthage, the Celts still have a chance to absorb some civilization, if you will. The coastlines of France, Spain, and Italy might belong to Carthage, but anything more would be too difficult to accomplish and far more costly to matter.
Right.
This transforms what we view as the West. It isn't simply Europe, but really the Mediterranean Sea as a whole.
It would be fucking hectic. There would be a million different things to learn about culture. It would be a headache, dude. Like, I just think human history is just so much more willing to accept and understand blocks of land and places. And like, you know, like they say, Occam's razor, right? Like,
Occam's razor, yeah.
Yeah, like we want simplicity. Like, we want things that like are easy to understand and make sense to us in a very bland way. So even though there's a lot of individuality and a lot of culture, I just think people in general are like when you worry about like political alliances moving into the future, like it would still encourage people to come together in bigger groups to have, you know, more unanimous representation, because it's just like, it's too much, dude. You guys would just be taken over by somebody else that's better organized.
Right.
Because you wouldn't be respected as
organization is key. I mean, if nobody's the top dog, everyone's fighting for that position.
Right.
You know what I mean? So yeah.
I mean, it would be highly unlikely anybody would pay taxes to like a puppet government that just is trading for money, that just taxes you but isn't directly involved in like your land and stuff like that.
You're not holding a saber to my throat. I'm not paying your ass.
Really not.
Are you going to chop off my hand? No, get the fuck out of here.
We really finna
The fuck do I give a fuck about you?
Yeah, like the violence and stuff was like necessary to keep control at the time. There'd be no way you'd have any superpower at the time without that.
A sea split between.
Also, this video should have been broken up into like a prologue.
Yeah.
And then like, because I didn't expect 10 minutes of video to be talking about Rome still.
Right, we're still
like,
yeah.
Still like,
we got like what, another 7 minutes left?
Yeah, and finally we're getting into like what Rome would, you know, what if the Roman Empire never existed? Like, we're finally there. So
Carthage and Greece. Tunisia eventually is seen as the homeland to the west, like we see the Greeks today, influencing the northern Europeans with a naval fleet and growing numerous colonies scattered across every shore. Speaking of those people, let's talk about the northern Europeans themselves.
Yeah.
Europe at this time really was split into numerous major tribes, like the Native Americans. So who truly were the Celts? When you think of Celtic people today, we think of Ireland, Scotland, and the small pockets in France and Spain. Like I said earlier though, these were not the Celtic homelands. The Celtic homeland is actually believed to be in southern Germany, and the Celtic people spread out to reach the coasts of Portugal and even central Anatolia, at least before Rome. The Romans had a thing with conquering a territory.
I know, I was about to ask you the same thing.
I think it's the like, never eat shredded wheat. The westmost part of the Iberian. I was like, never eat shredded wheat. I think it's the western part of the Iberian Peninsula.
Okay.
Changing it into their culture. Today, this is celebrated as bringing the foundations of Europe, and that isn't a negative in any way. It certainly kickstarted the formerly tribal natives into founding their own kingdoms and emulating Rome to compete, but this still came at a high cost. So let's talk about southern Gaul at the time of Julius Caesar in our own timeline in 58 BC. The Gauls in the south began giving into Roman customs, eventually establishing more orderly territory, producing wine and consuming it. They cut their hair and began to dress more like Mediterraneans than their northern cousins, or the long-haired Gauls. The long-haired Gauls were called so because they were not so receptive to the Romans and their lands, and were far enough away they would be very difficult to influence. In fact, when they began to believe the Romans were overstepping their boundaries and preparing to annex their people, They rebelled. This began what was known as the Gaelic Wars, which is overly complicated and doesn't need to be explained. By the end of their rebellion against Roman expansion, a third of all Celts were killed, another third were sold into slavery, leaving only another third in their place. These wars and the encroachment and assimilation by the Romans were not unlike the natives in America. The culture was pushed back, its people killed, and what was effectively a genocide, until the last bastion of Celtic culture left was on Ireland and Scotland, which just so happened to be past the Roman borders. After this genocide happened, the German migration began, fleeing another enemy in the east. And it was this German invasion/migration that ultimately led to Rome itself being destroyed and the demographics of Central and Western Europe being changed forever. But what if there was no Rome to weaken the Celts and Gauls? Since Carthage is the one interacting and trading with the Celts in a way could still be influenced by a civilized culture, but it'd be slower, less militaristic, and less prominent. So these Celtic cultures might still remain themselves, just with a Carthage flair. These lands we see as Romance or Latin instead are much more like Ireland or Scotland.
Like rolling
They wouldn't be a single nation, but I could imagine there'd be a closer tie compared to the mix-up of Latin and Celtic speakers in our own timeline. In terms of religion, well, a lot changes, but I'll get into that in the next video. The Celts might not stay in their territory forever. The Germans were going to invade south no matter what, simply because of the Huns. Yet without such a weakened state, it could be imagined the Celts would hold on better than the Romans did. And so by Rome expanding north and interacting with these tribal people peacefully and not, they exchanged ideas that they had gotten from the Greeks, and the Greeks got from Crete, and Crete got from Egypt. Yet without that militaristic force going so far north into the forests of Gaul or Germania or Britain and establishing colonies, the foundation of basic kingdoms and things we associate with medieval Northern Europe would never have taken place. Instead, these lands might have remained much like sub-Saharan Africa in a way, primarily tribal and rural, with a few distinct tribes being influenced by faraway kingdoms and adopting customs from them. However, I will talk more in detail about this in part 2, and yes, there will be a second part. The scenario is so long I had to split it up, otherwise it'd be a 40-minute video. In the next video we'll focus on the Greek world, Eastern...
Alright, so he's admitted that there is now a second part.
That's a lot.
I got a little lost, but...
So basically...
Crete is a superpower, right?
Not Crete, Carthage.
Carthage is a superpower. Carthage is a superpower.
Yeah. Which they already kind of were, but basically... So basically what he's saying is like if the Roman Empire never existed, Carthage would have reached its zenith, would have spread its influence, but their influence would have been a lot less militaristic than Rome's.
Right.
So, Carthage got fucked up.
Yeah, I remember this.
Rome fucked Carthage up.
I just want to see where it was at on the map.
But, so yeah, which makes sense, and also, basically, the Romans came in, fucked up the Celts, so then when the Germanic tribes came in, the Celts couldn't hold on to their land. You know, they couldn't hold on to their territories, so then that's when the Germans took over. And that's why you kind of see like the mesh of influences, but a lot of people didn't really bother with Britain for the longest time because they were just like, up there they're savages,
right?
You know what I mean? So that's why it makes sense like why the Celts were then able to survive there. It's really interesting, the whole thing. The whole like Roman history is really interesting, and it's so pervasive that when you try to take it out of the equation, I understand why he feels the need to like explain Rome's influence and everything, so then he can explain why when you take it out it's so different.
Yeah,
you know.
Me too. But get to the but.
But at the same time, I just feel like there's just a more kind of condensed way that you can talk about this. You know what I mean? But I mean, like I said, there's literally just so much. There's so much. So I think maybe what he should have done is he should have split it into maybe 3 15-minute videos, and like one could have been the prologue, One could have been, you know, the body of it, like the meat of it, and then the last part could have been like all the outliers and stuff like that.
I mean, even if it just would have been in like a simple timeline, and then the first video is what happened in Rome in the timeline.
Right.
Then the second video is, so if you take Rome out, this is what happens instead, and this is how I think it would have grown. Maybe even making up new ways the same wars happen without Rome involved. Right. That would be like a really easy way to kind of organize it. There's still same clashes of culture, the same presence, but you know, a different way for it all to kind of play out just without a superpower. But it is interesting.
It is super interesting, and like
I just kind of got lost in between, like in the last part. I just kind of lost grasp of like.
Yeah, he was kind of jumping around a lot.
Yeah, where like I already know what happened with Rome, so I guess that kind of. Which
makes sense. I mean, for like us, like, you know, you study like Roman culture and stuff like a lot, and then I've studied way more history than anyone ever needs to really know. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so for us, we're just like, okay, this is old news, so tell us what happens when Rome isn't there. But I guess if you imagine like somebody who doesn't know anything, like they know Rome existed, but they don't know the extent to which Rome influenced Europe, right? Like they know in theory Rome spread across Europe, but they don't know like how fully Rome conquered shit. You know what I mean? That this video is really helpful.
Well, Rome equals less evil Disney. Yeah.
How about an alternate history where not only did Australia lose the Great Emu War, but the emus retaliated by marching into the city of Perth, uprooting the government and starting a fascist rule over Western Australia, slowly expanding towards Eastern Australia and South Asia.
This is going on my Twitter. That's where we're going to leave you for now.
That was awesome.
It was great.
Very long video. Super long.
Peace.